This study is fake. Rosemary oil does not make your hair grow. And what has rosemary oil and hair growth got to do with shady networks in China, Russia, and Iran, and attempts to undermine cancer research for personal gain? No, I am not making this up. Sit back and relax, because I'm going to take you on a journey into why rosemary oil is a scam promoted by paid-for influencers and doctors not doing their due diligence properly, while others investigating this seem to miss the biggest scandal of all. Strap yourself in for a longer video than usual. I'll open your eyes to the most insidious scandal corrupting scientific studies all around you, and hopefully protect your money from scammers, whether it's rosemary oil or the next trend. I don't need to tell you how emotionally distressing hair loss can be, whether you're a man or a woman. It's tied to your self-esteem, and your hair is a part of who you are. When your hair starts to thin or recede, it can feel like you're losing a part of yourself, so you look for solutions to improve or hold on to your hair. As a result, every year, billions are spent by desperate men and women on rosemary oil, hoping it will be a miracle cure. But why? The appeal of natural remedies is understandable. They seem safer, more holistic, and less likely to have side effects than pharmaceuticals. But here's the catch. Not all natural treatments are worth your money. While drug companies have extremely strict standards of scientific evidence they have to meet in order to say that their drug works, supplement companies behave like they're in the Wild West. By the end of this video, you'll be shocked at what people marketing natural treatments, like rosemary oil, are able to get away with, making bank off of ordinary people like you and me. What they've done has led to an explosion in the popularity of natural treatments for various health problems, including hair loss and rosemary oil. It's promoted as an effective treatment for hair loss, with everyone from TikTokers to dermatologists saying it works as well as minoxidil, before recommending you buy their affiliate rosemary products. If you didn't know, minoxidil is a drug that has been used for decades to promote hair growth and fight male and female pattern baldness and other hair loss conditions, with mountains of solid supporting scientific evidence. So when they say rosemary is clinically proven to be as good as minoxidil, how are they doing this? How are they able to say that rosemary works as well as minoxidil? With this study, published in 2015, it describes a 6-month clinical trial in 100 men with male pattern baldness, also known as androgenetic alopecia. They say they found that applying a topical rosemary solution was as effective as minoxidil at treating the condition. And all the rosemary hype seems to lead back to this one paper. Whenever you see content in social media promoting rosemary oil for hair growth, there's a decent chance they either reference this study or someone in the comments will. Other creators have done a great job of reviewing this study from a more technical perspective, so I kind of put off doing this video myself for a while, but honestly, this study is disturbing. I was honestly shocked that no one goes all the way into this story past the initial round of red flags. Labmuffin did a good video, but even that didn't cover the whole story. I'm sick of disinformation, so I'm going to take you on the same journey I went through while researching this video and share what this reveals about the crisis shaking the scientific world right now and making it harder than ever for people like you to know what's true and what's not. What you'll learn by the end could keep you safe, or save you money. That works too. Let's start. So here we are, this all looks nice and credible, or is it? This is our first trap. What you're seeing is the abstract. Think of this as just an ad summarizing an article to help you figure out if you even want to read it. But it has very little detail and is prone to a lot of bias and interpretation. The authors can present things in any way they want here. It's like how media headlines often don't reflect what the real story in the article is. At first, this abstract looks credible. It's a randomized comparative trial in humans. The methodology looks reasonable, provided you're not an expert in hair loss science. There are a few key issues I'll rake them over the coals for shortly, but they found equivalent results comparing rosemary and minoxidil, with fewer side effects for rosemary, so maybe this is worth exploring. Wow, it even looks like it's been cited by loads of other researchers, so it must be impactful, right? At this point, you'd want to dive into the study itself to find out more information. Remember, the abstract is just an ad for the study to make you read it. The abstract can be found on PubMed and also through Google Scholar. PubMed is a well-respected database within the scientific community, and it's run by the US government, which lends an initial air of credibility, unlike a random, small journal website that might raise immediate suspicion. However, this apparent credibility that PubMed offers can be deceptive, especially when the underlying data presents glaring issues. This website is just a database that pretty much any journals can send their content to. It's usually just the abstract, because they want people to go on their sites and pay to read the full thing, or gain from the ad revenue of web traffic. But as you're about to see, this can be used to hide bad science, or make it harder to scrutinize. But I'm confident that most people talking about Rosemary, and probably all those authors citing it, have only read the abstract. You even see this when they talk about it. They share a screenshot of the abstract and not the actual study itself. This is like saying, guys, read this book, but you've only read the blurb on the back and haven't even opened it, and have no idea how it ends. So let's open that book. Oh, wait, unusually for PubMed, there isn't even a link to the journal or a DOI for the full study, making it even less likely people will put in the effort to go find it. You have to find the journal it came from first. Speaking of which, the journal that published it, SkinMed, has a low impact factor, meaning the average study that they publish doesn't get cited that much. This is a rough measure used to rank journals. It isn't perfect. For example, smaller specialist journals with more niche focus will inevitably have lower impact factor by number of citations, as the potential audience is smaller. But that doesn't make their quality or real-world impact any worse as a result. However, impact factor is still used to estimate journal quality. So, how low is SkinMed's impact factor? Referring to Scopus's site score, 0.4, compared to 14.1 for the reputable specialist dermatology journal JAMA Dermatology, and 48.2 for the general medicine equivalent JAMA, that's the Journal of the American Medical Association. Such a low score for SkinMed is a bit of a red flag. Studies in lower-ranked journals often receive less scrutiny and may not adhere to the same high standards of peer-reviewed research as those in more prestigious journals. Scientific studies are reviewed by other scientists in the same field, for free. Literally, they're not paid. This means prestigious journals have a much easier time getting quality reviewers, as they can rely on their reputation, as well as systems to ensure a quality review happens. Otherwise, that reputation is on the line. Meanwhile, journals with a much lower impact factor can often struggle with variable quality of their peer reviewers, especially if they're in fields with fewer specialists or where there's a lot less scrutiny, which you often see in cosmetic dermatology studies, like hair growth studies. This can lead to the publishing of flawed or less reliable research findings. Some really shady low-impact journals even pretend to have peer-reviewed articles when they don't. What this means is sometimes when you're looking at papers from some journals, you can find lower quality studies, mistakes, missed errors, bias, and, well, it's about to get a whole lot worse than just some mistakes with this study from SkinMed. Now, I'm not just bashing low-impact journals, but for what should be a groundbreaking study and the first to show promising results for hair growth with rosemary oil, if you conducted that study, wouldn't you want to publish that in a better journal? Plus, if you owned those other more prestigious journals, wouldn't you be interested in taking a quality, groundbreaking study like that? Why am I bringing this up? Because of what you're about to see in the real study and the people behind it. First, bear in mind, most people don't even get this far. They just stick to the abstract, which doesn't even have solid numbers in it, by the way, just subjective statements about significant increases and the like. Let's break this down, focusing on the pieces of this jigsaw one by one until we get to the authors themselves. Let's start with their methodology. The comparisons being made here are really poor. Firstly, there's no untreated control or placebo group. This means we can't tell if either of the treatments are actually doing anything in this study, and we can't exclude other factors like the seasons or just the effect of massaging your scalp, with both affecting hair growth on their own. Now, it's totally fair to use a standard treatment like minoxidil as your comparison, so if you can see whether a new product is better or worse than what you're currently using. However, a placebo is ideal if no one is going to be harmed by not treating them in the study. Plus, topical minoxidil has a low response rate of only 30 to 40%, so what you see is some people with insane hair growth, while most don't see much change. But despite that, overall, we still see strong average hair improvements. These days, most of the people that don't respond can be turned into responders by adding more things in, but this is a really good reason to have a placebo group. But it gets worse. The minoxidil dose of 2% here is way too weak for a male study group, lower than what's used in real life, which is 5% as a minimum, and sometimes even more than that. And the dose matters for minoxidil. 2% is no longer recommended as an effective hair loss treatment for men, and that was still the case at the time this research was alleged to have been carried out. Note that while 2% is still sometimes used for women, this was a study in men and male pattern baldness, yet they picked the standard treatment for that and chose to make it worse. That's a weird red flag. This means that for a comparison study, they picked a flawed benchmark to compare against, with no way to tell if the weaker minoxidil was doing much on its own. But that's not the only thing. 6 months is way too short for hair studies. Hair takes a long time to grow, but also a long time to be lost too. You're considered very lucky to see early signs of progress after 3 to 6 months on treatments. As a general rule of thumb, meaningful results of any hair treatment should only be judged after 1 year at least, with long-term results showing changes over multiple years. For this reason, if this study was extended past 6 months to a year or two, it's likely the minoxidil group would see better results than Rosemary. 12-month checkups are also preferred due to seasonal variations. That's exactly what it sounds like. Your hair goes through seasonal changes, like shedding in summer and growth in winter. This means you need to control for this effect by taking hair measurements at least 12 months apart. In a 6-month study, you can cherry-pick your participants and timing to influence the results. For example, by timing the Rosemary group's final results to coincide with seasonal growth, and timing the minoxidil group's final results to coincide with seasonal shedding. You can make it look like Rosemary is better than minoxidil even if they really did nothing, just by playing with timing. This is why we should expect placebos in our cosmetic studies. Speaking of which, this study from the 1980s included a placebo when comparing different minoxidil doses. You can see that even the placebo group sees an increase over time. By not using a placebo, slashing the minoxidil concentration to a weak dose, and then only running the study for 6 months, we can't actually tell anything about Rosemary as an alternative treatment to minoxidil, even if it did do anything. To use a strange analogy, this is a bit like staging a wrestling match between an Olympic athlete and a toddler, except the Olympian starts bound and gagged and has to free themselves first, and then the referee suddenly ends the match shortly after it starts and declares that it was a competitive match with the toddler matching the athlete, just because no one got the upper hand after 5 seconds. It's ridiculous. So far, this study isn't great. It's a poorly designed study, published in a low-impact journal. Already, we can be pretty sure that the findings of this study aren't reliable or useful for answering the question of whether Rosemary might do anything for hair growth or treating hair loss. But then, this is just from the methods section, and we find a weird and basic error. And then the real fun begins. Hamilton Rating Scale for Depression. That's a depression assessment scale. They meant to write Hamilton Norwood Scale, a standard rating scale for male pattern baldness. A weird brain fog moment perhaps? Maybe a simple mistake missed by peer review. Nope. This study turns out to be littered with much worse. Diving into the actual results section, everywhere you look there are issues that call into question the integrity of the authors, reviewers, and the publisher. I'll go in the order they appear. And I've probably missed some things too, as there's that many. We've got miscalculated data and typos. Starting with the men at baseline, the mean age of the men looks like it's calculated wrong, based on what they provided for each group in this table. But then you look at that table and you think, what's going on? They say 21% have stage 3 hair loss here, but then in the table this adds up to 29%. Why are there zeros for how many men have stage 4 hair loss? Is that on purpose? Something is wrong here, and it's hard to tell what it was supposed to be. What about the results though? The abstract said both groups experienced a significant increase in hair count at the 6-month endpoint, and that there was no difference between groups. But let's look at what that increase in hair count means. It's underwhelming, and teaches you an important lesson about statistical significance versus clinical significance, and bad science. They claim significance, but you look at this data and you realize, oh, the minoxidil group saw no change after 6 months, and the Rosemary group saw only a tiny change. Look at the means, the top of the bars, and then the error bars. They're all overlapping and barely distinguishable. I had to use a ruler to see if there was anything different, but that's only one point I thought was weird. What were the actual numbers? Uh-oh, the data is the same at baseline and at 3 months? That has to be a mistake, but whoever wrote this didn't just do it here. They copied that mistake forwards into the chart too. And by 6 months, that increase is negligible. A 5.5% increase in the Rosemary group after 6 months, which is just 7 hairs. Meanwhile, the 2% minoxidil group has an increase of less than 2%, just 2 hairs. They claim statistical significance, but I seriously doubt that. Growing less than 10 hairs in some undetermined area of your scalp over 6 months is not a good result. For comparison, this study saw that while the placebo group saw an increase of 90 hairs per square inch after 6 months, the 2% minoxidil group saw an increase of 175 hairs, which was significantly different. And in this study from 2002, researchers found that a single square centimeter of scalp saw an increase of 3.9 hairs with placebo, 12.7 with 2% minoxidil, and 18.6 hairs with 5% minoxidil. And that minoxidil boost was significant. Something ain't right about the minoxidil results in this Rosemary study. Plus, remember what I said about seasonal hair growth and shedding? Those increases in the placebo group could easily explain changes of less than 10 hairs in 6 months. But let's assume these Rosemary results are statistically significant, which they're not. Does that translate to a real aesthetic difference? Clinical significance? What does this look like? Well, it's not great for either group. I don't see any clinical improvement, which is what ultimately matters for cosmetic diseases. Beware of studies using the term significant. It's easy for you to misinterpret that as meaning it makes a difference large enough to see and feel. This is crazy! Their primary findings claiming significant hair growth in both treatment groups are based on data riddled with mistakes that doesn't actually show any improvements in hair growth, whether you're looking at numbers or pictures. Mistakes like this would never happen if you had this many people working on a paper, all these authors, peer reviewers, and then the publisher themselves. No correction notice, that I'm aware of, appears to have been issued for this paper to update it with the right data, and it was published in 2015. But then it gets worse. Just wait. The authors try to make a case that Rosemary has fewer side effects, which improves your ability to stick with the treatment over time. But the data they present is a bit of a joke. For a start, all the figures they refer to in the text are labelled or with the wrong numbers. But take a moment. Look at this. I mean, really look at that. What the heck is going on with these charts? These two are the same. Figure 6 has used the data from Figure 5 as a mistake. Plus, there's something fishy going on with their patient questionnaire data. But I won't go into that, as it's more subjective, and by this point, I don't need to, as I've covered their primary measures and methods. This study fails on the primary measure of success, or endpoint, to demonstrate hair growth quantitatively. Now, there are loads of claims about how Rosemary might work, and the authors even describe these in their introduction and discussion sections. I'll also get back to these later. This isn't really well supported by human clinical data, and definitely not this study. At this point, you have to take a step back. I'm not tearing this study apart anymore. What's really going on here? How did this happen? How are doctors all around the world using this study to promote Rosemary being as good as minoxidil? Even if it wasn't riddled with disturbing mistakes, this tells us that rosemary oil didn't do anything, on par with a drug that does work, but wasn't given a fair shot, by making it too weak and using it for too short a time, but also underperforms compared to loads of other minoxidil studies, and almost everyone that comes across this study will just rely on the abstract, where most problems are hidden away on another site, or they'll trust all the other hundreds of studies, and social media doctors, that cited this paper without actually reading it critically. And these problems aren't even the worst part of this shocking study. How does something this bad get published? This isn't just a case of peer review going wrong or being missed. SkinMed is obviously somewhat to blame for allowing this to be published. But I got curious. Who is behind it? Who is Panahi and the rest of these authors? Let's look them up. Back to PubMed. Well, they're involved with hundreds and even thousands of published studies, authoring a huge number of papers. 251 study results for Panahi, and the others? 375, 11, 1,880 for Sarkbar. This is a lot. No one is really that prolific. Worse, these studies are published across completely unrelated medical fields. For Panahi, these studies span cosmetics and dermatology, metabolic diseases, cancer treatment and management, treatment of mustard gas victims, ear infections, anemia, mental health, PTSD, nanotechnology in Alzheimer's disease, autism, the Big C from 2019, and caffeine for premature ejaculation. Yes, I just said that. The same sort of nonsense appears for all the other authors too, but who are they? Who is Panahi? Well, I tried to find this man, but I couldn't find much. I only found one picture of him, and it was on ResearchGate, where the account isn't verified. There's a LinkedIn profile which might correspond to him, but it's a bit bare with just 3 connections. Seems dodgy. Wait, is he even real? Let's try PubPeer, a website that's a bit like Glassdoor for scientific research, like for peer review, but after your article is published and open to anyone. What happens when we look up the authors and this study? Panahi, 6 results, with errors, possible conflicts of interest, and possible doctored images. Tagazade, 39 results, with many concerns and comments about their papers being retracted. Marzoni, only 1 result, this Rosemary study. I guess that's not so bad by comparison. And then Saagbar, 19 results, including rampant mistakes with numbers and miscalculations. This gem, where someone complains about a paper having 2,299 authors, and papers being retracted due to an investigation into systematic manipulation of the publication and peer review process, and the publisher Wiley being unable to vouch for the reliability or integrity of articles. On that last point, on the Wiley investigation, that's important. Oh, I'm coming on to that. Putting this together, the Rosemary oil study we discussed is fake. The authors that published it probably don't exist. The men being treated for male pattern hair loss don't exist. The clinical trial never happened. I can confidently say that this paper came from a paper mill. What's a paper mill? This is a type of company that you can go to and pay for them to write you a scientific paper that is totally fabricated, but looks reasonable. And they use dirty tactics to avoid scrutiny for as long as possible. And people don't seem to be calling this out much yet, which is insane. Who orders these papers? Sometimes it's just researchers and doctors trying to get more papers out there with their name on them so they can get promoted. Literally, this is a big problem in China, where busy doctors literally cannot advance in their career and make more money as a result without meeting arbitrary publication targets. With no time to run a study, they just pay someone online to make one up. But sometimes it can even supplement companies trying to promote their products by falsifying supporting data that they then use to make marketing claims like clinically proven to fight hair loss. Here's one example of a guy using a shoddy journal to publish fake papers to support his supplement business and Amazon store pages, with wording carefully chosen to avoid legal trouble. Jesus Christ. Have cosmetics companies done this to hype up and sell Rosemary oil too, perhaps? Well, of that I have no doubt. At least, that's my hypothesis. I don't think anyone else has really covered this and investigated this yet. You don't get much scrutiny if you just put up a misleading abstract on PubMed and make the actual dodgy paper hard to find. And with the way the cosmetics industry works, everyone selling rosemary oil, or any other cosmetic, just needs to point to a single published study, even if it's fake, and make claims like, this may boost hair growth, and clinically proven to prevent hair loss, might not work for everyone, based on a small study in a few dozen people, and it's totally legal. Plus, they get influencers to talk about this stuff on social media. Keep an eye out for sponsorships or affiliate links on those cosmetics videos, by the way. Here's one example, a reel about rosemary oil, sponsored by Zion. Look them up, and their page on rosemary oil for hair growth is a joke. They try to say rosemary boosts hair growth through multiple possible benefits of rosemary oil that could, in theory, promote hair growth indirectly, like being anti-inflammatory, stimulating blood flow, and being an antifungal. But none of these are clinical trials or even involve humans. 2 are animal studies, and 1 is on microbes in a lab, and none of those are looking at hair loss or hair growth either. The only studies that they reference for the hair growth claim, that actually relate to hair, is this awful and fake study from SkinMed, but also an older study by Murata et al. Claiming rosemary inhibits a major enzyme implicated in male pattern hair loss when you do a lab tube test, and try to use an animal model to support rosemary inhibiting the effects of that enzyme and promote hair growth too. But none of that is in humans. It just isn't set up to show that it could fight hair loss in humans. I'm not going to go into those studies today, but at this point I wouldn't be surprised if there's something wrong with them too. If a pharmaceutical company did this, they would be slapped down and fined hard by regulators around the world and publicly dragged in the media. Genuinely. This paper mill stuff also explains why what, on the face of it, appears to be a groundbreaking study, would only be published in a less prestigious journal like SkinMed, which, interestingly, hasn't retracted it yet. But this leads us to a massive problem shaking the scientific world right now, because it's not just small journals like SkinMed being affected. How widespread are these fake studies and paper mills? Very. Thousands of articles have been identified as probably from paper mills, and over time, hundreds of these have been retracted. They seem heavily associated with China, Russia, and Iran. By the way, this Rosemary study by Panahi et al. Is Iranian. It's a major problem now, and especially in the biomedical and health space. Estimates vary. It could be as low as 2% of all scientific papers being fake, with one journal, Archives of Pharmacology, estimating 1 in 20 of their submissions are from paper mills. However, this is almost certainly a gross underestimate. Some estimate that as much as 20% or more of published research is falsified, with global revenues for these companies running into the billions. In medicine, it could rise to a quarter of research, with 34% possibly being fake in the field of neuroscience. And this problem is only getting worse with AI. A paper mill scandal recently rocked the publisher Hindawi and their owner Wiley, when as much as up to 1 in 7 of their papers were flagged, leading to thousands of retractions and Hindawi being folded into Wiley. But that's unusual. Most of the time, scientific journals try to keep quiet about this. No one wants to be known as a company that might publish fake content that could cause harm from cosmetics and hair loss to cancer. Speaking of harm, this is literally hurting people all around the world. Using the rosemary oil example, you might think it's benign at first, but it really isn't. I wouldn't be surprised if millions of people all around the world have been fooled by this study, reassured by social media influencers promoting rosemary oil using this study, or similarly flawed interpretations of other poor studies. How many millions have been made by people pushing rosemary oil? And while all of this is happening, people lose their hair and suffer because they wasted time and money on treatments that don't work, made worse by fear-mongering about effective treatments just because they're not natural, or they're worried about the side effects of real treatments. You think these dodgy supplement companies just stop at paying for faked positive studies from paper mills about their supplements? Nope. They pay influencers to say positive things, and it's easy to capitalize on fear about drug side effects, like for the hair loss drugs minoxidil and finasteride, to push rosemary oil, because most people aren't going to read real clinical studies the way you have to find all of this out. Plus, it's easy to pay for bots to write positive comments about your products, and negative comments about drugs in the comments of YouTube or TikTok videos. The way these cosmetics and supplement companies can manipulate you is honestly disgraceful. But this isn't just about rosemary and hair. Remember, this affects all science, health, and medical fields. Remember, up to a quarter or more of all medical research getting through the peer review process and being published these days is probably fake. A quarter. Here's a scary example. A massive problem is paper mills have taken a specific interest in targeting cancer research. Why? We still have massive amounts of poorly understood genetic information in each of our cells. It's easy to crank out fake studies about how one of these genes, or a random protein, might have some role in a specific type of cancer with no oversight. But this causes serious damage by confusing, obstructing, and misleading other researchers about the science behind a major life-threatening disease. This wastes time and can even lead people down the wrong path, away from the research that could really matter for developing cancer treatments in the future. But all of that feels abstract, right? If you're struggling to make ends meet, and your career depends on having something published out there, why not pick a couple of random genes, pay a paper mill to write something about it, and get published? This isn't just doctors in China either. Around the whole world, people's careers have the same sort of pressures to just be published and cited. Buy a paper, then buy a second paper and cite your first one. Now you're published twice and cited. Buy 100 papers under a different name that cite you and support your first paper. Now you're super influential. Why not? This might sound ridiculous, but here we are. Hundreds of published cancer research papers, some in prestigious journals, describing experiments that never happened, and it's almost certain to rise into the thousands. If you're a cancer researcher and you know all this, it's like, what the heck? What research can I use? What's safe? And if you didn't know about this crisis before, you'd be scrambling to find out whether the genetic research your work is based on ever even happened. What about the research you already published, which cites fake studies? It's a mess. Sure, scientific journals, the publishers, are trying to adapt to this growing paper mill problem, demanding more raw data and using AI to detect suspicious patterns and duplicated or doctored images. But that doesn't really help you when there are thousands of journals out there and faked studies going back decades. Here's one possibly fake study published in Nature Medicine, a famous journal, in 2002 that has since been cited thousands of times, but now has people on PubPeer calling it out for doctored images. Even the big players aren't keeping up, and the ones that are trying to adapt are still struggling. This means you need to protect yourself from bad science. But this is where it gets even harder. Let's go back to that rosemary oil study. It's been cited by 105 studies, and counting, including loads of recently published papers which keep coming out repeating this lie that rosemary oil works. And many of these are also paywalled, making it harder for you to scrutinize what's really going on. The more papers that do this, the more it makes rosemary seem credible, and the harder it gets to challenge the lie. It's like that saying, a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. And if you're still wondering if rosemary is effective or worth trying, the short answer from what I've found is no. While there could be some active ingredient which might have an effect, there's no actual well-designed research in humans that's easy to access from real reputable authors in trustworthy journals to support that. I am open to that research coming out, but at this point, I wouldn't trust anything rosemary related without rigorous and reliable research. And no, some random person having a story about how it worked for them doesn't count. That's just an anecdote. And then there's possible explanations like being able to stimulate hair growth just by massaging your scalp without the rosemary oil, or the changing of the seasons, or your diet, or whatever. Stick any old oil in your hair and it'll moisturize it and make you feel better about the look and feel, even if it doesn't actually affect growth. You can't ethically promote something like rosemary when it's so clearly based on an original lie from a paper mill. So if you see someone doing this, call them out and send them this video. Until more people do this, we will continue to get more and more studies citing this rubbish and perpetuating the lie, with no one retracting any of these studies. Authors, publishers, and supplement companies citing this rosemary article need to take action. SkinMed needs to retract the paper and issue a statement about how they let this happen, and what they're going to do to prevent it happening again. At this point, we now have an entrenched rosemary oil industry, founded on fabricated evidence, but supported by circular social media hype that lets them continue to prey on people's vulnerabilities around hair. Influencers that have promoted rosemary oil using this study, some of whom are doctors, need to retract their content, stop taking money from these companies, and come out against not just rosemary oil, but the paper mill issue. This would be a good way to educate people about the dangers of trusting scientific papers and people calling themselves Dr. This or Dr. That at first glance, just because they look plausible and all sciencey. The paper mill fake science problem is too out of control now not to do something. This goes beyond rosemary, of course. If you're thinking about any product that claims to be clinically proven, don't buy it unless you've seen that clinical proof and know for damn sure that it's not from a paper mill. There's no red flags. The authors are real and trustworthy. The study is designed to actually prove the effect you need with data to support it in your disease or condition, and that the outcomes are clinically relevant and significant, not just statistically significant. Sounds simple, right? Of course not. This is really hard, and we are surrounded by dodgy claims everywhere from TV, social media, Amazon shopping, and even in scientific journals. But you get better at it the more you read clinical studies for yourself, and it helps having someone with a scientific background that you trust to help you along the way. But even then, this stuff can be missed. As far as I'm aware, some of the more evidence-based YouTubers that have covered hair stuff and rosemary haven't covered the paper mill crisis, or discussed that this study in particular wasn't just unconvincing, but outright fake. Good thing I'm here to spill the tea. Speaking of which, you should watch this next.